The Berserk mech's hull didn't just bend. It imploded. William's hands weren't even touching the physical controls. The quantum sensors screamed as he tore the machine's logic apart with a thought. The Ralem's mental network flickered and died under the weight of his absolute focus. Raya watched, her 6 legs trembling, as the metal giant buckled before a creature she had previously called furniture. The silence of the wreckage felt identical to the silence in the viewport an hour earlier. Back then, the glass showed only Raya's composed crest and the human's insignificance. Raya stood at the edge of the observation deck, her 6 legs locked in the ritual stance of a blood regent. The scanner hum of the border fortress was a constant, irritating vibration against her bone crest, a reminder of the fragility of this outpost. Outside, the cold of the sector bit into the hull, yet inside, everything was sterile and controlled. She watched the reflection in the reinforced viewport. It was a study in structural perfection, her own form regal and unwavering, evidence of Ralem architecture. The reflection was perfectly composed. Behind her, the trade Collateral sat on a low bench, a small, soft-skinned creature named William Hart. He was a guarantee for a mineral contract, nothing more than furniture that required oxygen and calories. The human was reading a primitive digital tablet, his movements slow and seemingly labored. Raya found the sight offensive. How could a species that struggled to maintain its own internal temperature be considered a valid currency in galactic trade? The humans were a mistake of biology, a collection of weak points stitched together with desperate hope. She adjusted her crest, the bone clicking softly, and returned her gaze to the stars. The fortress felt secure, a fortress of iron and logic, until the first proximity alarm began its rhythmic, mournful wail. It was the sound of something breaking. His immune system fights itself. By design? Raya remarked, her voice dripping with the clinical pity of a master architect observing a collapsing bridge. She didn't look back at the human as the alarms intensified. It is a fascinating failure of structural integrity, William. You are essentially a walking autoimmune crisis. She watched his reflection. He didn't flinch at the insult, merely closed his tablet and looked at the primary sensor array. The arrogance of the Ralem allowed for such observations. They were the builders of empires, and he was a biological error. Raya shifted her weight, her hooves clattering on the cold floor. His singing is terrible, she added to her aide, a dry joke to cut the rising tension as the scanners identified the incoming threat. A man who cannot hold a note surely cannot hold a line of defense. She leaned toward the console, noting the unaugmented human biology again. Tell me, William, is it true your unaugmented voices can reach 100 decibels? It seems a loud way to announce one's own impending extinction. The human remained silent. Outside, a massive, jagged shadow was emerging from the warp gate. It was the Berserk mech, a rogue titan of the old wars, its reactor leaking a toxic violet radiance that clouded the scanners. Raya felt the vibration in her hooves, a structural disharmony that suggested the fortress's shields would not hold. The reflection in the viewport began to waver, distorted by the gravitational wake of the Titan. But the human was simply standing. He looked at the Titan as if it were a minor calculation error he intended to correct. The fortress groaned under the weight of the Berserk mech's gravitational pull. Raya's crest flared, her 6 legs skittering for purchase on the vibrating deck as the violet radiance of the Titan's reactor bled through the shields. Every Ralem officer on the bridge was screaming, their voices a discordant mess of panic. They were builders, architects of stone and light, but this was a force of pure, unmaking chaos. The sensory tag of the border fortress, the incessant hum of scanners, was drowned out by the mechanical roar of the approaching god. It was not just a machine. It was a testament to a war that had never truly ended, now knocking on their door with fingers of wrought iron. Raya looked at the viewport. The glass rippled, distorted by the immense mass of the incoming threat. Her reflection was a ghost, a wavering image of a regent losing her grip on her own structural integrity. The bone crest she held so high felt like a heavy, useless ornament. She watched the scanners report hull breaches in sectors they hadn't even engaged yet. The fortress was a masterpiece, but even the finest bridge can collapse if the earth itself decides to move. He stood as if the gravity of the room had suddenly changed. He set down the child. Gently, then stood differently. Wait, a child? William's transition chilled her blood. One moment, he was a soft, fleshy collateral sitting on a bench, a biological error waiting for his own immune system to finish him. The next, his presence expanded, filling the room and pressing against Raya's skin like an incoming tide of cold mercury. He didn't look at the monitors. He didn't look at the screaming guards. He looked through the hull, staring directly into the heart of the Titan, as if he were looking at a flaw in a blueprint he intended to erase. His stillness was wrong. It was the stillness of a predator that had already accounted for every variable in the room. Impossible. The human moved. It was not movement. It was a glitch in reality. This was a sudden repositioning that defied the kinetic laws Raya had spent a lifetime studying. He was across the bridge before the sound of his first step reached her ears. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't call for help. He simply bypassed the physical world through sheer force of will, his body shimmering with the same violet light that powered the mech. But where the mech's light was chaotic, his was focused, a needle of quantum energy piercing the veil of the material. Kicked through the ribcage. The Berserk mech's reinforced chest plate didn't just dent. It evaporated into a cloud of quantum dust. It was as if William had rewritten the physical laws of the alloy with a single thought, turning solid metal into a suggestion. The Titan stumbled. Its massive legs, designed to withstand the pressure of gas giants, buckled like glass. It collapsed under its own weight, a multi-ton war machine reduced to scrap by the casual impact of a bare foot. Raya's legs locked. Her bone crest lowered instinctively, the hard edges scraping against the soft flesh of her neck. This was the fear response of her ancestors, a biological admission of total, crushing inferiority in the face of a higher power. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The guards, those proud six-legged warriors, were frozen in the same paralyzing awe. "His fighting is perfect," she whispered. William turned. His eyes were not human anymore. They were swirling voids of entangled light, the quantum connection to his fleet manifesting in his very pupils. He looked at her, and Raya realized she was not the architect. She was merely the resident of a building he allowed to stand. "I'm not angry. This is what focus looks like." The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm she had ever heard. The Raylam architecture of the bridge, once a symbol of eternal dominance, now felt like a fragile cardboard toy. Raya looked at the viewport. The reflection was gone. The glass was clear, showing only the wreckage of a god and the small man who had broken it. Her worldview didn't just crack. It dissolved into the cold vacuum of the sector. Everything she knew about strength was a lie. The human was not a failure of biology. He was a master of the fundamental forces, a creature that used a weak frame to house the power of stars. She looked at her 6 legs, still locked in terror, and knew she would never pace in sync with anyone else again. The Collateral was now the owner.